The research station floated silently above a distant rocky planet, its metallic structure glinting in the pale light of a faraway sun. A group of human children arrived, their eyes wide with a mix of excitement and nervousness. They had been told stories about the station, about the cubs that lived within its containment areas, creatures that were small now but held immense strength and intelligence. Scientists had warned them that these young predators were unpredictable, curious, and capable of surprising both in their cleverness and in their agility. As the transport doors hissed open, the children stepped cautiously onto the polished metal floor, their small footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Each child felt a flutter of anxiety in their chest. They could not see the cubs yet, but they could sense that something alive, powerful, and alert waited nearby. The adults accompanying them reminded them to remain calm, to move slowly, and to respect the creature's space. But the children's curiosity was stronger than their fear. They peeked into observation windows and saw shadows moving behind reinforced glass, small but fast, with eyes that gleamed faintly even in the dim artificial light. The station smelled of clean metal, recycled air, and a faint musk that hinted at the presence of living beings. Every step they took was measured, and every sound they made seemed amplified in the quiet hallways. Some children whispered questions to one another, while others simply stared, mesmerized by the unknown. Despite the warnings, the children could not help feeling drawn to the cubs. There was something in their movement, the way they shifted and watched from behind barriers, that made the children feel as if the creatures understood more than they should. For a moment, the nervousness faded, replaced by fascination. They had come to learn and explore, but they could sense that the cubs would teach lessons far beyond what any classroom could offer. It was the beginning of an unusual encounter, one that would challenge their courage, curiosity, and understanding of what it meant to connect across worlds. Every heartbeat in that quiet station seemed to signal that something remarkable was about to unfold. The children moved quietly along the observation corridor, their small hands gripping the railings as they peered into the containment area. It was the first time they would see the cubs up close, and the excitement in the group was mixed with a sense of nervous tension. Shadows shifted across the reinforced glass, and then, slowly, glowing eyes appeared, bright and intelligent, fixed directly on the children. The cubs did not move at first. They simply watched, as if assessing every detail, noting every tiny movement, every hesitant breath. The children's hearts raced. Some felt fear prickling at the edges of their minds, remembering the stories of the cubs' strength and cunning. Others felt fascination, captivated by the creature's unusual features, the smoothness of their fur, the alertness in their movements, and the sharp intelligence that seemed far beyond anything they had seen on Earth. A low, almost inaudible growl vibrated in the room, but it was not threatening. It was a sound that spoke of curiosity and awareness rather than aggression. One of the smaller children leaned closer to the glass, forgetting to be afraid, and the cub tilted its head, mirroring the gesture, creating a strange connection that made the child gasp. Whispers traveled through the group, some asking questions, others daring to speculate on what the cubs were thinking. Every adult accompanying them reminded the children to be cautious, but even they felt a tension in the air, the kind that comes when observing something extraordinary. The cubs, though young, seemed to possess a presence that filled the entire chamber, an energy that demanded attention without making a single aggressive move. The children could not tear their eyes away. In that moment, they realized that these were not mere animals. They were intelligent, aware, and capable of understanding far more than any ordinary creature. Fear and fascination blended into something new, a sense of awe, the kind that made them feel both small and part of something much larger. For the first time, the children understood that they were not just visitors. They were witnesses to something rare, something that might change how humans and these extraordinary beings could coexist and learn from one another. The children froze, unsure of what to do as one of the cubs, slightly larger than the others, stepped forward from the shadowed corner of the enclosure. Its movements were cautious but deliberate, each step measured as if it understood that sudden motion could alarm the humans. The cub stopped a few feet away, lowering its head slightly and extending a paw toward them in a gesture that seemed almost like an invitation. The children's eyes widened. They had expected snarls or swift attacks, but instead, the cub appeared to be trying to communicate in its own way. A few children whispered to one another, their voices shaky with both excitement and nervousness, but no one dared to move too quickly. The humans accompanying them reminded the group to remain calm, and slowly, one brave child lifted a small hand, mimicking the cub's movement, holding out a finger in a gesture of greeting. The cub tilted its head, its glowing eyes reflecting curiosity, and then gently touched the child's hand with its paw. A collective gasp echoed through the observation area as the other cubs stirred, watching the interaction with keen interest, their eyes following every motion. The children began to understand that the cub was not hostile, but intelligent enough to recognize that patience and gentleness mattered more than force. Slowly, more children extended their hands, small gestures of trust, and each time the cub responded with careful, measured movements, avoiding aggression and creating a silent connection that no one had anticipated. The adults in the room exchanged looks of cautious amazement, realizing that what they were witnessing went beyond ordinary human-animal interaction. It was as though the cubs were teaching the children something about respect, awareness, and communication, and the children were learning just as much, their fear giving way to curiosity and wonder. By the time the cub returned to the shadows, the children felt a new sense of confidence. They had made contact without fear, without force, and had been met with intelligence and care. It was a moment that would linger in their minds, a turning point in the first encounter, hinting that this station held lessons far beyond the usual experiments. Lessons that connected humans and these extraordinary beings through understanding, trust, and silent communication. The rocky ledge stood only a few feet high, but for the children it seemed much taller, intimidating in the alien light of the station. One small child stepped forward, gripping the rough surface with both hands, unsure of how to place their feet without slipping. Their heart raced and a nervous laugh escaped, echoing slightly in the chamber. From nearby, one of the cubs crouched low, its glowing eyes fixed on the child's movements. It lifted a paw slowly, carefully showing how to press the toes against the rock, how to keep the body balanced, and how to move smoothly from one hold to another. The child watched, hesitation slowly giving way to focus, mimicking the motion with trembling arms and legs. The cub moved beside them, almost like a silent guide, stepping and reaching in perfect rhythm with the child, never rushing, never forcing, just showing what could be done. The child took a deep breath, placing a foot where the cub had indicated, then another, and soon their hands found stable holds. Confidence began to build as the fear melted into concentration. Laughter bubbled out, not from recklessness but from joy, the thrill of success, of moving carefully yet boldly across unfamiliar terrain. The cub's tail swished gently, a silent sign of encouragement, and the other cubs began to approach, circling near the children, watching intently. Each child who attempted the climb found themselves guided by the subtle mimicry of the cubs, learning from motion rather than words. Their earlier fear of these creatures was now replaced with wonder and appreciation for the strange intelligence that had chosen to teach rather than harm. The room seemed to brighten, not with artificial light, but with the energy of shared discovery, the innocence of children meeting alien creatures on equal footing. Adults observing from the side couldn't help but smile, seeing how trust and patience could transform an intimidating challenge into an opportunity for learning and bonding. By the time the first child reached the top of the ledge, a chorus of laughter and cheers filled the area. A new harmony forming between human curiosity and predator instinct. A connection neither side had expected, but one that promised exciting adventures to come. After the first child reached the top of the rocky ledge, the other children watched with wide eyes, inspired but still cautious. Each child approached the ledge one by one, their steps slow and careful. The cubs, who had once been distant observers, now positioned themselves beside each child, moving with an awareness that seemed almost human. One cub lowered itself slightly, demonstrating where to place hands and feet, then shifted to show the next movement, all in silent, deliberate gestures. The children copied each motion, sometimes failing at first but quickly adjusting as the cubs patiently repeated the demonstration. What was remarkable was how each cub seemed to sense the unique skill of every child. Some were naturally strong and balanced, while others were smaller or less confident. And the cubs changed their guidance accordingly, slowing down for some, showing extra steps for others, never rushing, never judging. The children began to respond with growing confidence, their smiles widening, laughter ringing out with each small success. Meanwhile, scientists and researchers observing from a distance exchanged astonished glances. They had prepared for controlled exercises, expecting the cubs to behave according to strict training protocols, but what they were seeing was entirely different. The animals weren't just following commands, they were teaching, understanding, and adapting, using a form of intelligence that seemed to blend instinct with genuine empathy. Even the adults who had doubted the children's safety could not help but marvel at the natural harmony forming in the station. The children, inspired by the cubs' patient and deliberate guidance, began experimenting on their own, testing what they had learned while the cubs observed silently, ready to adjust or assist if necessary. It was as if a new language had been formed, one that required no words, only attention, care, and trust. By the time all the children had climbed the ledge at least once, a sense of accomplishment and mutual respect filled the space. The cubs had not only taught climbing skills, they had instilled confidence, trust, and the understanding that learning could be a shared journey, uniting species through patience, observation, and the quiet guidance of those who truly care. High above the activity halls and climbing areas, the council gathered in their observation chamber, a circular room filled with glowing panels and security screens. Each official's eyes were glued to the feeds showing human children and predator cubs interacting below. At first, they expected chaos, children frightened, cubs restless, and orders being ignored. Instead, they saw something entirely different. The children climbed carefully, encouraged silently by the cubs, who seemed to understand exactly when to guide a hand or nudge a child forward. Laughter echoed faintly through the feeds, and small victories, like a child reaching the top of a ledge, were met with quiet approval from the cubs, their glowing eyes attentive and watchful. The council members shifted uneasily in their seats. This was not the controlled, disciplined environment they had envisioned. The cubs were teaching, helping, and somehow communicating with the humans in ways the council could barely comprehend. Whispers passed among the officials. "This shouldn't be happening," one said, frowning at the screen. Another leaned forward, fingers tapping nervously on the control panel. "What does it mean for our plans? For the station? For human safety?" Their unease was not just about the immediate situation. It was about the potential consequences. Humans and predator cubs cooperating in such a natural, trusting way challenged everything the council believed about control, discipline, and hierarchy. Some members feared that allowing this kind of relationship could lead to unpredictable alliances, and perhaps even undermine their authority. Others were simply fascinated, unable to look away from the extraordinary sight. Human children moving with confidence, learning skills they had never attempted before, and cubs guiding them with an intelligence and patience that seemed almost deliberate. The unease grew as the council realized that the interactions were more than play. They were learning, trust building, and a silent exchange of understanding. Something was changing on the station, something beyond their control, and the officials felt the weight of it pressing in. They could see the future beginning to shift, and it both frightened and intrigued them. The council understood that this simple scene of children and cubs climbing together might alter everything they thought they knew about human and alien interaction. One of the children approached a taller, more jagged ledge than any they had attempted before. Their small hands trembled as they reached for the first hold, and their feet slipped slightly on the smooth surface. Doubt flickered in the child's eyes, and for a brief moment, fear threatened to take over. The cub beside them moved carefully, positioning its strong, agile body close enough to offer support without crowding or frightening. Its glowing eyes remained fixed on the child, alert and patient, as if silently saying, "You can do this." The child hesitated, glancing down at the distance below, and the cub responded with a gentle nudge. a subtle motion that encouraged forward movement rather than imposing force. Slowly, cautiously, the child placed one foot onto the next hold, following the cub's example. Each movement became more confident as the cub mirrored the correct motions, showing exactly how to balance and reach without slipping. Other children paused to watch, eyes wide with curiosity and admiration, while the remaining cubs watched silently, their attention fully focused on the lesson unfolding before them. The child's small muscles strained as they stretched upward, gripping a higher ledge with trembling determination. A cheer rose from the other children, quiet but supportive, as the cub beside the climber leaned slightly, offering a steady presence that reassured the child without breaking the sense of independence. Slowly but surely, as the climbing exercises continued, the children began to notice the cubs in a new light. At first they had been wary, imagining the young predators as unpredictable and dangerous, creatures to avoid or fear. But now, as the cubs guided them through each step, offering gentle nudges, mirrored movements, and patient observation, the children's perception began to shift. They started to see the cubs not as creatures to be feared, but as teachers and mentors, small yet powerful guides who could help them navigate the challenges of the rocky ledges and climbing walls. Each time a child struggled with a difficult hold or slipped slightly, a cub would position itself beside them, silently demonstrating the correct movements, nudging them forward, or simply staying close to offer reassurance. The children began to respond, listening with full attention, observing carefully, and imitating the cub's precise motions. It wasn't just a one-way learning experience. The cubs, who had initially been cautious around the human children, began to show signs of trust. They followed the children closely, their movements synchronized as if understanding that cooperation rather than competition was the path forward. When a child paused to consider their next step, the cub would pause too, mirroring their hesitation, creating a rhythm of silent communication that both sides seemed to understand instinctively. The scientists watching were astonished at this mutual understanding, noting the unusual intelligence and adaptability of the cubs, and the way the children responded with patience, courage, and respect. Over time, a quiet bond grew, invisible to anyone who did not witness it, but unmistakable to those involved. Respect and trust became the foundation of every movement, every climb, and every success. The children's laughter and triumphant cheers began to mix naturally with the soft, approving gestures of the cubs. What had started as fear and hesitation slowly transformed into a shared confidence. Each day, the bond strengthened, unspoken but deeply felt, a silent agreement that humans. Inside the meeting chamber, the council sat in tense silence as recordings of the climbing sessions played across the large screens. The images showed human children laughing, learning, and even celebrating alongside the cubs, while the cubs mirrored their movements with remarkable patience and care. What looked innocent and hopeful to some appeared threatening to others. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, their voices soon rising in worried debate. Some argued that the cubs' intelligence was far greater than expected. These were not ordinary young predators. They were problem solvers, quick learners, and now teachers. If they could guide human children with such skill, what would they become when fully grown? The question hung heavily in the air. Were these interactions planting seeds of an alliance that humans might not be able to control? Others pointed out the subtle shift of loyalty already visible. The children no longer feared the cubs. They trusted them, perhaps even admired them. Bonds were forming that no amount of strict orders or regulations could easily undo. To the council, this was not simply about climbing lessons, it was about influence. The cubs, without aggression or force, were shaping human behavior. That thought unsettled even the most neutral of the members. Fear threaded through the chamber as different scenarios were imagined. What if one day these cubs used their growing intelligence to lead, not just follow? What if the children who trusted them so deeply carried that loyalty into adulthood, questioning the council's authority? Could cooperation between species grow into something larger than the council itself could oversee or control? Though no decision was made in that meeting, the unease was clear. The council's fear was not born from claws or fangs, but from the quiet power of trust, respect, and understanding. What they saw on the screens was not danger in its obvious form, but the possibility of a future they could neither predict nor command. As the children practiced climbing the rocky walls once again, their laughter and excited voices filled the air. They had grown braver over the days, trusting the cubs who guided them with silent patience. But bravery often carried its own risks. One child, eager to prove themselves, attempted to climb a ledge much higher than before. The child's fingers reached for a jagged stone, but the grip slipped. In a terrifying heartbeat, the child lost balance and tumbled backward. A sharp gasp came from the watching group, and even the scientists monitoring from a distance froze, unable to move fast enough to help. Yet before disaster struck, one of the cubs sprang into action. With a sudden leap that blurred with speed, the young predator caught the child mid-fall, its claws curled inward so as not to harm. Instead of the harsh grip many expected, its hold was careful, almost protective, lowering the child gently to the ground. For a moment, silence filled the space. The other children stared wide-eyed, not with fear this time, but with awe. They saw strength that could easily destroy, turned instead into an act of safety and care. The rescued child clung tightly to the cub's thick fur, breathing hard, but alive and unhurt. The cub tilted its head, releasing a soft rumble that sounded more like reassurance than dominance. Slowly, the tension dissolved. Relief spread through the group, followed by whispers of admiration. The children now understood that the cub's power was not simply about danger. It could be used for protection, for kindness, when guided by trust and respect. Even the scientists, watching from their screens, exchanged astonished looks. What they had witnessed was not an accident, but a choice made by the cub to save, not harm. The bond between human children and these young predators deepened in that single moment as fear shifted into respect and respect into something that looked very much like friendship. The climbing no longer seemed like just a game or a test of strength. The children soon realized that the cubs were showing them something much bigger. When one child slipped, the others learned to reach out quickly, their hands steady and ready, just as the cubs had done earlier. When a child was nervous to take the next step, the cub beside them would lower itself, waiting patiently until the child was brave enough to try. This quiet patience spread to the group, and soon the children were watching out for one another, just as the cubs watched out for them. The scientists who observed were struck by how easily the cubs had inspired teamwork without speaking a word. Trust formed naturally, as though the cubs knew that true strength came from unity, not fear. Guards, who had first believed the cubs were nothing but dangerous predators, began to question their own judgments as they watched children and cubs move together with silent understanding. The children learned to communicate through simple signals, small gestures, or even just eye contact, and the cubs responded with the same sharp awareness. Every climb became smoother, every challenge less frightening because they faced it together. What amazed the adults most was how the cubs encouraged without commanding, and how the children followed without hesitation, not out of fear, but out of respect. The bond forming between them seemed to carry lessons that no classroom could teach. By the end of the day, it was clear that the children had not only learned how to climb, but how to trust each other, how to lean on someone stronger, and how to give courage to someone weaker. For the scientists, this was the most unsettling discovery. The cubs were shaping human children into something stronger, not by force, but by guidance. And that realization echoed heavily in the minds of all who watched. The day the council arrived, the atmosphere on the station shifted. Their entrance carried a weight that silenced even the scientists who had grown used to the cubs' presence. The officials walked with sharp eyes, scanning every corner as if expecting danger to leap out at any moment. Yet what they found unsettled them more than any threat could. On the climbing ledge, human children moved with confidence, their hands gripping stone and rope while predator cubs guided them with gentle nudges and careful demonstrations. Instead of fear, there was laughter. Instead of hostility, there was trust. One council member leaned forward, whispering to another, unable to hide surprise at the sight of a cub slowing its pace so a smaller child could keep up. These creatures, once thought to be uncontrollable, were showing patience that rivaled even trained guardians. The children, in turn, looked braver than expected, their faces lit with determination as though climbing higher was not just play, but proof of what they could become. The council's unease grew with every passing moment. Some saw danger, imagining a future where humans and cubs together would form a bond too strong to control. Others saw hope, realizing that the old beliefs about predator species might no longer hold true. The scientists kept quiet, waiting to see what judgment would fall, while guards tightened their grip on weapons, uncertain whether they were still necessary. The council could not deny what they witnessed: the intelligence in the cubs' eyes, the trust shining in the children's faces, and the undeniable bond forming between them. It was not a scene of weakness nor one of fear, but of growth and courage. Conflicted whispers spread among the officials, torn between caution and wonder, knowing this moment carried the weight of change. The hall grew silent as one of the youngest children stepped toward the tallest climbing structure. The height alone was enough to make the scientists murmur in worry, and even the guards shifted uneasily, ready to intervene. But the cubs did not move to stop the child. Instead, they surrounded the base like guardians, their glowing eyes fixed upward with quiet focus. One cub leapt ahead, climbing the first ledges with ease, then looked back, giving a low sound that carried encouragement rather than command. The child placed trembling hands on the stone, copying each movement shown. Step by step, the climb continued, every slip corrected by the cub demonstrating again, every pause filled with patient waiting. Higher and higher they went, the cub staying close, never pulling, only guiding. When the child reached a shaky point near the top, the cub steadied its own weight against the wall, pressing its body slightly as if to show balance, and the child mirrored the motion. Gasps filled the room as the child finally reached the peak, standing tall with arms raised in triumph. The cubs below let out soft growls of approval, a sound that carried pride rather than threat, while the other children clapped and cheered. The council members could not deny the meaning of what they saw. This was no accident, no trick of instinct. It was cooperation, built on trust and shared effort. The child's victory was not only a human achievement, but a shared success between species. For the first time, the officials' eyes softened, the fear replaced by something closer to reluctant respect. Some even leaned forward as if trying to understand how such harmony had been possible. What had begun as suspicion now stirred into the possibility of partnership. In that single moment, one child's climb stood as living proof that strength and intelligence, when guided by trust, could unite rather than divide. The council members, who had once viewed the bond between the human children and the predator cubs with nothing but suspicion, now found themselves watching with a different kind of attention. What they saw was not chaos or danger, but something far more profound, a quiet harmony unfolding before their eyes. The children no longer hesitated around the cubs, and the cubs no longer carried the edge of menace that had once made the officials uneasy. Instead, there was a flow of understanding in their movements, as if two different worlds had somehow found a way to speak the same language without words. One child reached a hand toward a cub, and instead of flinching, the cub leaned forward gently, an action so small yet powerful enough to change minds. The council members, trained to look for threats, now saw signs of trust, and for the first time they wondered if their fear had blinded them to an opportunity. Quiet conversations began between them, whispers about revising rules, loosening restrictions, and studying this connection instead of smothering it. Where there had once been talk of walls and separation, now there was mention of guidance and protection. Some still held on to doubt, but even they could not deny the evidence in front of them. The children and cubs had begun to mirror one another, not only in climbing or movement, but in respect and patience. A cub waited for a struggling child to steady themselves, and the child, in turn, waited for the cub before moving again. The scene carried a kind of rhythm that could not be forced, only earned. By the time the session ended, the council no longer spoke of danger. They spoke of potential. Fear had slowly melted into respect, and with it came the first steps toward a new way of thinking, one that leaned not on control, but on cooperation. The story of the children and cubs did not stay hidden within the training grounds. Word traveled quickly, carried by workers, guards, and scientists who had witnessed it with their own eyes. Soon, the entire station knew of the strange yet powerful bond forming between the young humans and the cubs. What had once been seen as a dangerous experiment was now being spoken of with wonder. The tale reached nearby colonies too, spreading faster than anyone expected. Families, teachers, and leaders all wanted to know more about how such trust had grown between species that were once kept apart. Instead of fear, curiosity began to take root. People started asking questions. If children and cubs could learn together, what else might be possible? Could new ways of teaching be discovered? Could exploration teams one day include both species, helping each other survive where one alone could not? For the first time, the future did not seem heavy with danger. It seemed full of possibility. Programs began forming quietly. Some scientists suggested new learning centers where children could train alongside cubs under safe supervision. Others proposed joint exploration missions, believing the cubs' natural strength and instincts could balance the humans' creativity and problem-solving. Even guards, once tense and suspicious, began to speak with a softer tone, realizing they had seen something worth protecting, not destroying. The children themselves felt the change most strongly. No longer were they viewed only as subjects of study. They had become symbols of hope. They had shown that fear could be replaced by respect and distance by friendship. The cubs mirrored this trust, staying close, no longer just observers but companions. A new era was beginning. Where once the council had worried about control, now discussions turned toward coexistence. Across the station, people started to believe that this unlikely bond might shape the future in ways no one had predicted. What was feared as a threat had become a light of hope, a reminder that progress is born not only through power, but also through understanding.